Catus Maximus here. This is doing a little video about this Mustang MS42. This is a New Britain made ratchet. The Mustang brand was just a little bit more budget than the actual New Britain branded ones, mainly because they just didn't spend as much time grinding and finishing the ratchet. This is MS42, and this is a very early, and that's why I titled this Early New Britain, is we can see one patent and then a patent pending. We're just a little bit later on the Mustang MS43, we could see that they had been granted that second patent for the slightly modified version of the Kilness ratchet mechanism, which is a floating pawl style mechanism for round head ratchets. Very reliable. Kilness is the name of the engineer. He was a MIT graduate. It's also one of the absolutely least copied ratchet mechanisms, although I recently was sent a interchangeable head torque wrench, a promo Chinese one, and it actually had a copy of it, which didn't make any sense because there's just a whole heck of a lot of machine work, and I'll show you that here. One thing I was also going to mention is New Britain ratchets are actually pretty notorious for having very loose, not so much the New Britain branded ones, but New Britain has rebranded versions of their ratchets. Probably 15 different companies they've done that for. But I will say, oddly enough, this Mustang, super tight anvil. This is just stock, no shimming or anything. And oddly enough, this old Mustang, a little bit more play, but it's really not bad. Taking a look at the mechanism, it's a little grubby in there. Always fun taking out these spiral rings. You got to find just the little corner where it starts. Get a little pick in there. Just so you can get the thing started like so. Once you do get it started, you can just get the pick under it and run it around. And that pops it out. And then oddly enough, I don't know exactly how this is. That's the big difference, is the reverse knob you can see is quite a bit different. And what am I running into here? Oh, there is some kind of shim, some kind of piece of plastic or something in there. I'm not exactly sure what this is. Yeah. Never mind. This one has been shimmed, but it has a piece of plastic in there. That just doesn't make any sense to me, although I suppose it works. What I don't understand is how exactly... So here's our infamous Kilness mechanism. This is an old school style. We have quite a few teeth on there. It's one of the big differences between this and the SK is, one, this is just a floating pawl that's retained by this top plate. I mean, it can walk around and self-align inside the ratchet head, but the fact that it has, you know, SKs have 3 teeth, where these just have a zillion little teeth on them. I see why they changed the mechanism. If you look, see that side of the groove doesn't have anything in it, but this side, you know, I always need like 100 hands. But on this side, you can see, well, if you... Anyway, I'm going to point to it like that because I don't have enough hands. But there's like a little snap ring that's actually retaining this reverse knob in the top of the ratchet. That's obviously a much more unnecessary expense, but it's just still kind of neat to run into one of these old school style ones. And just to show, there's 2 plates here. There's this little peg, which is actually it's a little spring wound in a couple loops, and it has 2 fingers that come up. And so this plate interacts with one end. The other end is connected to this lower plate, which is what's managing the pawl. And so when you rotate this, what happens is that spring gets compressed and then snaps back the other way. So that's how the reverse mechanism works, is that when you push this over, the lower plate snaps to the other side, and that's how you get the reversing action. And that's how one of the ways you can really tell a New Britain ratchet, if you're not familiar, is because the reverse switch, is really pretty stiff. and when you use the knob, you can really feel that very strong detent. There's one thing that New Britain ratchets don't do, their round heads, is self-reverse. And self-reversing is actually a notorious issue for round head ratchets. And it happens when you ratchet and then you go back to freewheel a little bit, and the reverse knob catches a little bit on the body and starts to turn enough to cause the ratchet to actually reverse direction. And it's really frustrating on a lot of ratchets, but once again, it's basically unheard of when it comes to New Britons. And I'm putting this back together. Once again, I've never seen this plastic shim washer in any of these ratchets, so I don't know if this washer is actually factory, or because it seemed pretty early. This ratchet's probably made in the 1950s or something. So I don't know if that's factory or if that's just somebody who was using it to attempt to shim it up and tighten up the anvil. So that sums it up. I just wanted to make a little video. One thing I will say that they have changed in the more, I guess, more recent than this versions of the ratchets is when they started out, they were really light. I don't know how to describe, but very low back drag. Just really, really nice. But they must have had some issues where there were, you know, just a minimal amount of crud would build up, and they must have had some slipping issues, because a lot of the New Britain ratchets all started. You have to push a lot harder. Just started putting in stronger pawl springs, and that would be the only reason. So obviously, if you keep the ratchets pretty cleaned and regularly lube them, then you can certainly have a very light pawl spring. It just needs to be really clean inside, because it isn't quite as much forcing it out to the outside of the ratchet. And the mechanism is actually self-tightening. Once you start putting torque on it, it pushes the pawl harder to the outside edge of the ratchet. But if you have a really weak spring and little pieces of crud, then it will just slip before it even has a chance to get into its camming action. Other than that, I'll have to say that it is pretty neat to run into one of these early New Britons. Sometimes having, you know, it seems a modern thing that people are really concerned about the back drag of ratchets. And this, along with like Kokins and stuff, is just so super low. I mean, you basically need a clutch type ratchet. And the second thing is, low back drag ratchets and fine tooth count round head ratchets aren't a new thing. It's just kind of like lost in the annuals of time when companies go out of business, and then people kind of rediscover old technology. That's the easiest way to put it. Anyway, other than that, kind of neat Mustang MS42. Kind of like the shape of the handle with these depressed centers here. No hole in the handle. But just kind of like its style versus being more shiny and chrome plated. I mean, we can see it surprisingly enough on the MS43. The forging is a lot thicker, so I wonder if that's also indicating that maybe under the most, since this is a half-inch ratchet, under the most extreme situations, they may have actually had some of these fail because the ratchet mechanism is strong enough. I could see this thinner beam maybe giving them a little bit of trouble, and that's why the newer forgings are just really extra beefy. But nonetheless, I like this old design. I like the way the reverse switch is integrated via a snap ring. I kind of like that design. It's very robust, although the new ones are more robust, or just as robust, I should say. This having a little bit wider beam. New Britons, you know, they have such a strong detent in them. That's just a little bit easier to do the reversing action. Anyway, really appreciate everybody who's been watching. See you next time.